Mexico went to war with France over one of these. Well, maybe not one of these exactly, but a French bakery was involved. This is a story of a French baker who wanted justice, a French king who wanted to flex, and a Mexican general who lost a leg and turned it into a national monument. Welcome to the Mysteries of Latin America. My name is Andrew Colón, and today I'm going to tell the true story of La Guerra de los Pasteles, the Pastry War. A war that may have started with one of these, but it ended up being all about power, politics, and pride. On this channel, I tell the stories of the myths, legends, history, and mysteries happening all across Latin America and the Caribbean. If you enjoy these stories, go ahead and like, subscribe, and follow, depending on how you're getting this, and vámonos.
Let's set the stage. In 1821, Mexico gained independence from Spain, but that independence came with baggage, a broken economy, power struggles, and a political carousel. More than 20 different presidents in 20 years. It was actually 14 different people, as several of them served more than once if you want to be exact, with each one trying and failing to keep the country intact. Now, one of those key figures was Antonio López de Santa Anna. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it should. He's the man who led Mexican forces against the Texans at the Battle of the Alamo. Later, he'd be president again during the Mexican-American War, when Mexico lost half its territory. Still a touchy subject here in Mexico today. But back in 1832, Santa Anna was still a rising political figure nationally and internationally. Under his command, though, things were unstable, to say the least. Riots and uprisings were common during those times, and it was during one of those riots that a French baker named Remontel in the town of Tacubaya claimed that Mexican soldiers ransacked his shop and looted his pastries. Now, if you're familiar with Tacubaya in Mexico City, you'll know that it's part of the city now, but that wasn't always the case. Back in the 1830s, it was about 3 miles outside of town, and it kind of served as a place for wealthy locals and foreigners to live or visit. Today, Tacubaya is an integral part of Mexico City. So when a French citizen claimed that the Mexican army trashed his shop in what was basically a foreign enclave, it wasn't just one baker's loss. It was the spark that would light an international crisis. So what actually happened? In 1832, political tensions in Mexico boiled over again. A power struggle between Federalists and Centralists turned violent, especially in and around Mexico City. Troops loyal to different factions clashed in the streets, and Tacubaya, despite its status, was not immune. During one of these uprisings, federal troops reportedly stormed through the area, breaking into homes and shops to get supplies or to just loot. Monsieur Remontel claimed that soldiers ransacked his bakery, destroying furniture, ruining his ovens, and stealing bread and pastries. He said he lost everything. Whether it was deliberate or the result of a politically unstable country, the results were the same. A wrecked bakery, a ruined business, and one very angry Frenchman. Remontel, sometimes called Remontant in some documents, wasn't just mad. This man was furious, and he was not about to take this sitting down. Remontel demanded compensation from the Mexican government. He was ignored. So he did something bold. He wrote a letter directly to King Louis-Philippe I of France. And here's where things spiral. At this point, relations between France and Mexico were already strained. French citizens doing business in Mexico were frustrated. People wouldn't pay their debts to them, they would seize their properties, and they got biased rulings in court. And to make matters worse, a French citizen had been recently executed in Tampico, accused of piracy, further inflaming French public opinion. So when Remontel's letter reached Paris, it wasn't just the complaint of an angry citizen or business owner. It was the perfect excuse. France officially demanded 600,000 pesos in damages to Remontel and other French nationalists. Just to put that into perspective, the average Mexican at that time made about 1 peso per day. So this was the equivalent of many lifetimes' worth of wages. Sources say that Remontel's claim reached about 60,000 pesos, which is about $5 million today. But once France bundled together the rest of the French claims, merchants, businessmen, taxes, property owners, and I guess the tip, The bill ballooned. And as a final touch, France went ahead and tacked on 200,000 pesos for a little surprise they'd be sending across the Atlantic. Spoiler, it wasn't flowers. Total price tag 800,000 pesos, nearly $86 million today. Over a local bakery, some unpaid debt, and a whole lot of French indignation. The Mexican government under President Anastasio Bustamante at the time said, "Ni madres," which can be translated to absolutely not. So France did what colonial powers like to do when you tell them no. They sent a fleet of warships. In April of 1838, French warships arrived at the strategic Mexican port of Veracruz, one of the most important trade hubs in the country, still is. And the French Navy blockaded Mexico's entire Gulf Coast. That meant no imports, no exports, and massive pressure on the Mexican economy. Even worse than tariffs. Mexico, understandably, was not amused. And things got worse. In November of that same year, France sent 20 more warships. On November 21st, 1838, France opened fire on San Juan de Ulua, the coastal fortress guarding Veracruz. By the next day, both the fortress and the port had surrendered. So let's get back to Santa Anna. Yes, that's Santa Anna. The Alamo guy. He'd be president at least twice. He'd been on one of his many retirements at this point, but he was called back into action. He arrived in Veracruz with Mexican troops and began readying the defense of the city. On December 4th, 1838, French troops attempted a landing. Santa Anna led the Mexican defense, but during the fighting, he was hit by a grape shot, a cannon shot, that got him right in the leg. His leg was severely injured and had to be amputated. But Santa Anna was always a showman. He held a state funeral for the leg, seriously. There was a parade, there were speeches, full military honors for a leg. And the event only helped fuel the legend and the ego of Santa Anna. Meanwhile, the blockade was choking Mexico's economy. Trade collapsed. Revenue disappeared. People turned to smuggling back and forth from Texas just to keep goods moving. With all this French military presence in the Gulf, tightening control of the ports, other countries started to get a little anxious, like the U.S. and especially Texas, which had just gotten its independence a few years earlier. But it wasn't just Texas looking nervously. Britain, which had huge, massive interests in Latin America, didn't like the fact that France was throwing its weight around so close to its shipping lanes. Worried that France might use the conflict as an excuse to grab territory in Mexico or destabilize the region, Britain stepped in, sending its West Indies fleet as a not-so-subtle warning. The result? A treaty signed on March 9, 1839. Mexico agreed to pay the full 600,000 pesos, but it insisted on one thing. France would get no special treatment on future trade deals, no exclusive rights, no long-term influence, just the money y nos vemos. France backed off. They got what they wanted, a little money and a symbolic win. Mexico kept its sovereignty, but at a heavy price. A broken economy, a humiliated army, and even deeper internal divisions. And though the French sailed home, the damage lingered. Mexico had lost face. It looked weak on the world stage. Santa Anna lost his leg, but gained a new political life. And the tensions that led to the Pastry War, they didn't go away. In fact, they'd be back. While the Pastry War ended without further bloodshed, it did set the stage for the second French intervention in Mexico in the 1860s, when they returned with bigger ambitions and installed Austrian nobleman Maximilian of Habsburg as Emperor of Mexico. Remember Cinco de Mayo? That famous victory at Puebla was part of Mexico and France Round 2. There's a link to that story in the description if you want to see what happened when Mexico fought back against France again. And for Santa Anna, the Pastry War wasn't just a war. It was a political reboot. Despite losing part of his leg, he used it as his symbol of sacrifice. He returned to power, became president again, and proudly displayed his prosthetic leg at public events. Some accounts even say that his leg had a special carriage of its own. But the story didn't end there. During the Mexican-American War, at the Battle of Cerro Gordo in 1847, Santa Anna was forced to flee a surprise attack by U.S. troops. In his rush, he left behind gold, his carriage, and his famous prosthetic leg. Illinois soldiers seized it as a trophy. Today, Santa Anna's leg is on display at the Illinois State Military Museum.
So did Mexico and France really fight a war over pastries? Well, yes and no. It was really about control, foreign influence, and national pride. But that French baker in Tacubaya, his ruined bakery really was the spark that started the whole thing. Did he see a single peso of that compensation? That part's lost to history. But for a guy whose pastries got looted in a riot, he definitely made a mark on history. And that's the story of the Pastry War, one of Latin America's most bizarre, petty, and largely forgotten international conflicts. If you like this video, hit the like button, enable notifications, and share it with like-minded history nerds like me and you who like an unusual bit of history. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the mysteries of Latin America. Until next time, I'm Andrew Colón, y hasta la próxima. Adiós. Y provecho.